Welcome to the Conversations on Healing podcast, where host Shay Biter speaks with renowned healthcare leaders, practitioners, and thought leaders to explore the world of wellness, the incredible powers of self-care, and what it truly means to heal today. Join us on this journey to become more whole, healed, and connected.
Well, welcome, Cynthia. I'm so delighted to have you with me on the Conversations on Healing podcast. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really excited to have you as a guest. You've written a beautiful book that was released a few years ago about your personal experience of going through really challenging health journey that it seems has extended, like over a 10-year period or perhaps more. But and it's a look into chronic illness and how we find our way to healing. And I think your story is particularly potent because you're trained as, Western medically trained physician, you have an MD, and you knew how to use like that toolkit to try to help you to resolve some of the health challenges that you were having. But you also found that that wasn't enough, that there were other tools that you had to add and develop and skill sets that you had to kind of bring in and identify. And so you went and have continued to go through this beautiful process of unfolding how to heal yourself. And so I wanted to start with a question around, your own journey of healing and really a little bit of sharing of what you have gone through and what you've learned from your personal healing journey.
Great. Thank you for that introduction. It's getting harder for me to even know where to start because, oftentimes what I thought were sort of hard beginnings of either the healing journey or the illness journey, the deeper I go into living into what healing is, there's really no sort of beginning. Everything kind of blurs together, right? We're just living, breathing ecosystems that are constantly changing. I would just say first off, to something that you highlighted in the intro, the medical degree, I think is very useful for me. Of course it was very useful. I went into my experience first with autoimmune thyroid condition, knowing a lot and having connections. I had resources. Who do I reach out to? Who's the top-notch specialist, in the Bay Area of California, of which I had many to choose from. And I had the privilege of accessing that kind of care. On the flip side, it was also, it was a framework in which I was imprisoned, because that was my truth. That was my, not just in terms of my profession, but really how I understood the truth of reality, and it was quite black and white. Over here, if you fit a certain criteria, you have a lab test or, another diagnostic test, then you had a disease and you had a name. And then based on that, there was a treatment protocol. And then if you didn't, then, you're kind of left on your own. And so the first thing was when I was diagnosed with a thyroid condition, I did I sought out the top-notch specialist and got a prescription for what it was I needed to do, and also had a bunch of tests, and I responded to that, so it was fairly textbook, and then my numbers resolved. In postpartum cases, which mine was, I was a new mother, they usually resolve. And so within a year, I was off of my medications. My numbers were normal. Everything uh, was fine. I was cured both by my book as well as my doctors. The only problem was that my symptoms were not resolved, you know. But and that's what I mean, where like I couldn't see sort of beyond my mental framework. So I'm still not feeling well. My numbers look great, and therefore I am by definition cured. So, you know, and that was the setup, that was the context for the beginning of the next decade of my life was, you know, things escalated first slowly and then pretty dramatically to the place where I was really, really debilitated, you know, largely housebound for a greater part of a decade. And for the first couple of years, I think I just lost a lot of time. I mean, you know, from my mental framework, I lost a lot of time. You know, in hindsight, I realized, oh, that was like the necessary sort of crucible that I was going through in order to break past this framework I had really constructed as my definition of reality. And there was this, you know, it's terrifying anytime your worldview breaks open. It's terrifying because you feel like you're losing your mind. I mean, I felt like that. I questioned everything. But then, you know, once we break down and break open, hopefully, there's this whole world out there. And so, you know, kind of a way to condense that journey is just that, you know, first I began with acupuncture and herbs and understanding the body as one sort of living ecosystem, which sounds so silly if I think about that, you know, that's not how I thought about it through my training, you know. It was very mechanistic, and it was, even though I'm an internist, I'm chronic disease specialist looking at the whole body. I mean, you know, kind of the primary care doctor, the holistic doctor in Western medicine, in that paradigm. I was still approaching myself and my patients as really mechanistic. And so from acupuncture and herbs to slowly regaining uh, some of my vitality, and I'll say it was still really minimal at that point. But I was able to take care of my young kids. I was able to kind of do activities of daily living, but really, really limited beyond the house. But that's when I began to explore, you know, what do I eat? What do I put into my, you know, body? What do I not eat? You know, what does my body not want? And then eventually it led me to these broader and deeper frameworks of Western medicine, integrative medicine, and functional medicine. Functional medicine really being ecosystem medicine, if we want to call it that, or root cause. So, like, if we imagine, you know, the functional, there's a tree. So, oftentimes we're kind of, you know, in medicine, we're dealing with the leaves. So, you know, kind of looking at the symptoms, the disease states, but really going down, how do we go all the way down into the roots? Like, what's being fed into this tree that's manifesting on the outside that we can see as symptoms and disease? So, so that was, you know, kind of my trajectory in a nutshell. And I would just say in the next, and then I, you know, I've regained a really healthy, you know, full life. Um, but I continue to go deeper and deeper. And I realized, you know, usually when we're looking in functional medicine at the roots, you know, we are looking at food and hydration. We're looking at stress, you know, mental, emotional, physical. We're looking at relationships and networks. We're looking at toxins and pollutants in the, you know, in the environment. We're looking at infections and allergens, and oftentimes those are kind of stealth, you know, like I didn't know I was reacting to gluten because I was having it every day. And so, you know, it becomes sort of invisible because it's everywhere. Um, Sometimes there's stealth infections. I didn't know I had a parasite in my gut because I had sort of, you know, gotten past the acute symptoms. And so those were all important, but I keep going deeper and deeper and deeper into I wouldn't even say the roots, but really into the soil. And what is the soil? So that's kind of where I am right now, both as, my label is integrative and functional medicine, but, I don't really, I don't, those are just, that's just a hat. But I keep going deeper. And the deeper I go into the soil, we go, so first, in the leaves and in the branches, the way I see it is it's a simplistic model, right? It's reductionist. And we need the reductionist science to actually understand the parts, and then we apply that. But then we go down into the roots, and things can get actually really complex quite quickly and complicated. And so suddenly, from nothing helping me feeling better, I went to like infinite numbers of things. How many diets do I try? How many supplements do I try? What kind of movement and exercise do I do that's optimal for me? And it became really overwhelming. And so now I feel like those are all necessary, and we're always moving through different parts of the tree, and they all manifest actually at the same time. But if we go down into the deepest parts of the soil, which are actually endless, we go back into simple, but not reductionist, but essential. So it's the level of the essence. And so again, the deeper that we go, if we can access that, everything above it, expresses in the tree, right? So whatever it is that we're addressing, whether it's on the root cause or in the soil, all these seemingly disparate conditions or symptoms on the leaves, in the branches will heal in concert, because we're addressing these things. And it's like, wait a minute, like that patient came in for migraines, but then her eczema healed too. What? How did that happen? It's like, well, it's the same roots, it's the same soil. And so it's just manifesting, as these different conditions, but their separateness is kind of an illusion. So that's kind of where I am right now.
There's so many wonderful directions that we could go from what you just shared. I want to start with kind of a simple definition of what functional medicine is, because we actually haven't spoken a lot on this podcast about functional medicine. And I know some of our listeners might be like, wait, what is that? What is functional medicine? So you already defined some of the core elements of it, but just to give, to somebody who's never heard that terminology before, if you could share just a bit about what is functional medicine.
Yeah. So as I said earlier, I think the easiest way to sum it up is root cause medicine. So really going down into the root causes instead of focusing on the symptoms and how to alleviate the symptoms. I'm all for symptom alleviation too. I'm all for comfort and relief. And I think that I probably would have chosen that route had there been drugs or procedures or something, kind of quick and straightforward to treat my conditions, which I was basically left with severe debilitating fatigue, chronic vertigo, insomnia, these symptoms and conditions, chronic fatigue syndrome, dysautonomia, the autonomic nervous system is not functioning correctly. And Western medicine is notoriously unable to address, or I'll say to fix these conditions. That's kind of how we approach it. How do we fix this, right? What do we have in our tool bag or toolkit to fix this? And they're not really fixable. Because it's really the body is out of balance. And so it's about rebalancing as opposed to just going in and alleviating a symptom, right? So with functional medicine, what we're doing is root causes, looking at the root imbalances. So are there nutrient deficiencies? that, so at the core of fatigue, for example, might be ongoing inflammation, right? So, and then that causes a whole bunch of downstream, um, dysfunctions and mechanisms at the level of the cell, which we don't have to go into. But then, all right, so there's a lot of inflammation. How do we lower inflammation? And so again, we might look at, are there any allergens, right, that I'm reacting to that I'm not even aware of? And for me personally, gluten and dairy were big ones. So they were constantly triggering inflammation, which is using up what little energy that I have. And then, and then I'm feeling miserable. I feel flu-like, and so that's an example. Are there allergens? Are there deficiencies in that my immune system might need to function optimally? So my magnesium was probably low. My vitamin D, B complex is really big to help our bodies detoxify, our livers to really detoxify, and not just, environmental pollutants, but just regular metabolic waste from the cells. And I didn't know that, I didn't know there were things that we could do to support our body's innate capacity to take care of itself. And so that's really what we do in functional medicine. And to make it a little bit more, to give a clearer example, I guess a simpler example would be, for example, if somebody came in with diabetes, right? And so what do we usually do? I mean, yes, diet is really important, but in terms of reducing your carbohydrate and sugar intake, huge, right? So that doesn't change. But then we give drugs to help lower the blood sugar, right, in different ways. So part of it is lowering the blood sugar, part of it is increasing insulin sensitivity. So, but that's kind of our general repertoire. And then we kind of we monitor, we do health maintenance for potential complications, right, of the eye, of the kidneys, of the cardiovascular system. And so again, it doesn't, for me, functional medicine doesn't sort of supplant conventional medicine. It really broadens it, it enhances it, it gives us more tools, right? So we begin to step back and say, okay, well, we know the diet, we know the chronic, carbohydrate and all that, but is there anything else we can look at in terms of imbalances? And for example, there's an autoimmune component now of adult onset diabetes, which is kind of under the radar still. We tend to think of that as juvenile diabetes, and that whole line is not that, again, that clear-cut black and white delineation is not there anymore. And there's more and more people with an autoimmune component, and that is often associated with gluten. So it's like, okay, you know what would happen if this person actually eliminated gluten for a while, right? And let's watch. And there are tests, and then even if there aren't tests, it's a low risk, high potential gain if they're willing to do it. It asks a lot of the patient, but let's try that. Magnesium deficiency, again, it's really, really common that most people are deficient in magnesium. It's not in the soil anymore. Our soils aren't enriched the way that used to be. And then we use up a lot of it, right? If we're under stress and inflammation, magnesium is one of those minerals, the essential minerals that we use up a lot. So we're not replenishing in the way that we might need. And so magnesium deficiency is one of the contributors to insulin resistance. So, okay, do we support them with magnesium? And if so, which form? So those are just, that's just an example of how we might go deeper. And then, if someone has got chronic inflammation, their body's going to be pumping out, more cortisol, which raises the blood sugar. And so, okay, let's look for other causes of inflammation. So we might sort of holistically begin to help your blood sugar regulation. And so, I just call it functional medicine. I just call it good medicine. It's very thorough. But it's going below the surface of how it is that we're sort of taught by protocol, usually with drugs, to address chronic disease.
And I think this is going to come to play more and more with the number of people that are contracting COVID. I was listening to something with a gentleman yesterday. I believe his name is Dr. Leo Galland, but we'll find it and put it in the show notes for our listeners. And he was sharing that the research is showing that a number of people who have contracted COVID seem to be getting an increased risk for diabetes. So kind of like you were describing, so suddenly more people that have had COVID are getting diabetes. They're also seeing through research pretty consistent changes in high blood pressure. And the more people that they look at who have symptoms of long COVID, even if they had a very mild case of illness. And so he's using some of the theories and philosophies and practices of functional medicine to treat patients who are continuing to experience the after effects of COVID for a long period of time. And it seems to me that that's a very important use of functional medicine is, for this particular moment that we're in historically, where especially in the United States, because our rates are so high relative to other countries in terms of the number of people who are contracting COVID, we're going to have millions and millions of people that are going to have to deal with the aftermath. In fact, he even mentioned, which was fascinating, that they're seeing on brain scans. This was a study that was done in Britain, which again, we'll locate and put in the show notes, but that there are changes in the gray matter in the brain after people have contracted COVID. And we're still learning so much about the long-term effects and how it affects some more than others. And so he was sharing that there's protective protocols, things that you can do, using things like CoQ10 and curcumin and other supplements and things that are within the wheelhouse, certainly of functional medicine doctors, that can help to diminish some of those after effects. And so I feel like our conversation is also really relevant to, we're going to have a ton of people with potential chronic disease states. We're seeing tons of chronic fatigue symptoms from people who have COVID. And so I feel like this conversation is particularly potent and relevant to that, virus as well.
Absolutely. When, the thing with the functional medicine and just root cause medicine is that the prevention and the treatment are often very similar. Because it's the same thing, right? We're trying to improve and optimize the immune function, decrease total inflammatory load, whether you're sick or whether you're healthy, by society's definitions. To that point, we can also put this in your show notes, is I have a free ebook which came out right at the beginning of sheltering in place. And still, again, kind of the studies now have shown that, yeah, these are kind of tried and true. And, and it's called How to Strengthen Your Inner Shield, right? So it's not just about, masks and hand sanitizers and ventilation on the outside, sort of protecting ourselves, which is important. But it's, we've got this inner shield, right? It's the biggest difference between those who do well and not well, particularly in the beginning of like getting severe disease, was how strong is your immune system, right? And vitamin D is just kind of a no-brainer, right? And that's been shown, like people who have low vitamin D, are much more susceptible. And so it's cheap, it's widely available. It's a level also, if people want to get tested, blood level, you can get tested at your primary care doctor. You don't have to go see a specialist, right? And that's just, let's just do it. Why is that not part of the CDC plan? So it's, there's a lot of very, very basic things that we can do. So yes, absolutely. Am I seeing a lot of patients with post-COVID complications? I am. And yet this is kind of what we've been treating, and how we've been treating and approaching patients for a long time. So, I mean, are there additional, sort of tools, and would we use higher doses of particular nutrients like CoQ10 and curcumin in someone with those, symptoms? Absolutely. Yeah. But if they were already kind of manifesting moderate to, borderline severe disease, or even mild, you know what? Let's sort of let's support their system through it, right? Not just through the acute illness, but really to try to optimize health so that there's not a lot of dysfunction afterwards. So a lot of what this whole pandemic is really showing and hitting home is that it's very, very individual, right? How disease manifests with one cause. And the state of our health before, right, getting an infection matters, right? So oftentimes what we're calling COVID illness, oftentimes is like COVID is like the tipping point. So that there's a lot of sort of chronic inflammatory stuff building up. They get COVID and can't compensate. And so now we're calling it COVID, which it is. And it's also something much larger.
Right.
So then we can extrapolate beyond individuals and say communities, and say, as a country, as a planet, how are we doing? How strong is our immune system? Where can we begin to build resilience? How do we do that? And so much of it is about diversity, right? Diversity of food, right? And nourishing the diversity of our ecosystem within our gut and keeping that really in balance. And so inner and outer are really, really reflecting each other.
And I think, Cynthia, this is a topic that, in my view, hasn't been discussed in the media nearly as much, or even in public health policy. My master's degree is in public health. And as somebody who has that training and educational background, I understand masks and I understand vaccines and I understand those approaches, certainly. But what I feel has really been neglected in the conversation, kind of in full force, is strengthening of the immune system. Exactly what you're describing is that, illness does not land the same way in every body. We know that. We know if you have a fabulous, well cared for immune system and you get COVID, it is going to manifest very differently in your system than if you have serious illness already. And like you said, you're almost at that tipping point of falling over the edge into debilitating illness or chronic disease. Then if you get the virus, like suddenly it's a whole different outcome. And I feel there's a ton of education that we could be providing to people about how to strengthen your own system so that if you do get it, you have a better opportunity for having, good health in the long term. And so I'm glad that, functional medicine looks at this. I'm glad we're talking about this because I do think there's, a growing body of evidence of things that we can do. And, we've discussed a few. A lot of it's diet related, right? Vitamin D, like you said, such a simple, low cost option, but hugely impactful. We see that it has a difference. Things like curcumin and resveratrol and quercetin, and there are certain probiotics and things, obviously, that people are looking at, and we'll again list some of this. Things for restoring mitochondrial function, because I know they're seeing that in some cases with COVID, it is actually creating some damage to the mitochondria. So looking at that part of the story, omega-3s. So, there's a whole range of things. And obviously all of this, you want to get, a consultation with somebody qualified like yourself to personalize the care and to really reflect on what would be the right treatment plan for that person. But there are so many things we can do. And that's just from a supplement perspective. Then there's all these other things. I mean, we mentioned diet, but then there's all the lifestyle pieces. Do you have high levels of stress, which we know can compromise immune function? Are you happy? Are you getting good quality, air and sunlight and water, and are those things, what's the environment in which you live? And then there's a whole other subset of mental health, because mental health, we also know, can contribute to physiological illness and can create harm within our system on multiple levels. So it's really like this unique composition. But I feel like there's, as an individual, that we actually have tremendous power to consciously strengthen our minds, our bodies, our spirits, so that if we contract a virus like COVID, we have a whole different framework for how that virus interacts with our immunity. And so it's that soil piece. It's the piece that you're describing in the model of functional medicine, that the soil matters. And if we care for and nurture and love that soil and treat it well, that then the plants that come into it, they take shape differently as a result. And so I love that that's part of the philosophy. And I wanted to bring that, into the COVID conversation, because I think it's a really powerful piece where functional medicine can really help to be a voice for, hey, look, there's a way to provide strength to your body. And that will help you if you do happen to contract this virus. So.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you touched on so many different points, and I think the unifying theme of all of that is empowerment. It's a sense of agency, and I think particularly when during a pandemic, that sense of helplessness is amplified, and nothing spreads like wildfire than that sense of helplessness and panic. And we're isolated from each other, um, and on top of that there's been like global climate stresses as well. So all of these, and we've got social media and the internet amplifying that, like up to the second. So, and it's been really interesting, just I've been listening to a few different sort of wise men and wise women, I'll say that, just in different traditions, and including scientists and philosophers, but also real wisdom teachers and healers. And they're saying, well, it doesn't actually, it's probably not that different than other times. We've had world wars, but there have been tons of other plagues, and epidemics with much fewer resources. Yes, there's the climate stuff, but there's been climate stuff before. How much of this is the immediacy of the news and how it spreads, and then it gets amplified, which then creates even more energetic sort of panic, and instead of empowerment, right? And then everything feels like the end of the world. And so the sense of agency is so vital to the healthy function of the immune system. I think that's been the hardest thing, because like you said, I can give a protocol, I can give a cocktail of things for people to take. I can prescribe a diet. I can even, really encourage them to do the exercise that they need. If they are perpetually in a state of fight or flight, though, how much is the digestive tract going to absorb, right? How much can the immune system really function optimally under that? Because the message we're sending is that it doesn't really matter to be super healthy. You just got to get the hell out of there, right? So that's the hardest part, is that healing happens in this rest and flow state. And then everything that we're hearing is putting us in fight or flight. So it is, and that's where, that's ultimately, I cannot, and none of us can get into, somebody else. That's where the agency comes in too. Only we can each do it for ourselves. So it is hard to do under times of crisis, right? It's like people who have regular practices, people who have, strong communities, like, wonderful. You have this resilience built in, but challenging right? When all of a sudden we have these multiple crises, and it's like, oh my God, I have no ground under me. What do I do? And at the same time, I mean, I'm just saying that's really where I was with my own personal health, right? Was like the entire, my entire world collapsed. And it is actually a moment of clarity, because, and I hear this from a lot of patients, particularly ones with big diagnoses where they're looking at potential death, right? They have this clarity of consciousness, like, if I can just put that fear aside for even a moment, what matters to me? And things kind of distill down into none of that matters, this matters. So things, again, they kind of seep down into the soil, and you just see what's in the soil, what matters, what's at that essential level, and the rest of it is just fluff. And so it's beautiful. And I felt like we as a species experience that. And also just in our family, I saw it in our neighborhood and all that, was at the very beginning of sheltering in place, things, I mean, people were, there was still that element of fear, but things really simplified and things slowed down, right? And the earth got, or at least where I live, and also other people I know in the cities, things just quieted. The air cleared, right? It was like, my husband's in climate change and renewable energy, and he's like, oh my God, the air's never been clearer. You should look at our parameters. And it's like, wow. So there is that. So how do we harness that? And how do we cultivate that? And it's not about, just positive thinking and denial. It's really, healing is not just the light. Healing is not just what we call good. Healing is the balance. And how do we stay in the flow, right? And so what I love is, we look at heartbeats, we look at brain function. It's all waves, right? And somehow I know this for myself. I'm speaking for myself, and I see it now, of course, in my patients and in people that I know, is like, and people even ask me right now, like they'll say, well, when you got healthy, when you finally got healthy, like, A to B, and it's like, no, I'm not at B. Like, I'm still living, I'm still breathing. Oh, and breath, right, is also wave. And so it's like, no, things change, things happen, my waves are not so stable all the time. But how do we get back into that? And so I remember one of my mantras when I was really struggling was, I would wake up in the morning and I'd be like, oh, today is a new day. Today is a new day. Like, whoo, yesterday was hell, but today, dang it, is a new day. And then I would start fresh, right? It would help me be in the present moment. But then I remember as I was getting better, I remember these days where I would just have like, oh my God, it was not just I felt good. I mean, I felt like blissed out, I felt really in flow, and I felt so expansive and alive. And then the next morning, I'm like, oh my God, today is a new day. Like I need to let go of that and not be attached to it. Because if I get attached and things kind of just stay there, like I'm not in flow again. So today's a new day. I just welcome whatever comes. And so that's a practice that, I've kind of carried out throughout whatever's been going on, on the large scale as well. It's like each day is just, a new day. And people, one of my patients that I just consulted yesterday was like, oh, and what do we do about the mask? It's not a mandate anymore. Like, what do you recommend? And I feel so good, that we're in this stage. And I said, well, I'm really glad too. And yet it's just another day. You know what I mean? Like, it's not that big of a change, right? It's just another day. And so yeah, we have to be able to find whatever it is that our own practice is, to stay open, to stay connected to ourselves, first of all, to stay embodied, not leaving because things feel uncomfortable, but really staying in our bodies. And then how our bodies are completely connected, not just to the earth, but to everyone, to the air, which is why I love that symbol, the functional medicine tree. It's just, there's so, right, the roots, our roots are connected not just to the soil, and we're not just, connected fully to the air moving in and out of us, but right, trees' roots interconnect, and then they're stronger together. And how do we do that? And so, the gift of being in a digital age is that actually we can connect much more, right? Can we use the tools that we've been given for resilience, for healing, as opposed to just sort of, oh my God, the internet, it's so bad because, my kids are addicted to it and I have too much screen time and it's screwing up my melatonin balance. I mean, it's like, no. It's the same tool, right? How do we use it? And that goes ultimately back to agency. How do I choose to connect with that? And so it's the same thing with food, right? So I could be on there's no such thing as a perfect diet, but like I could be on a really, really good nutrient dense diet. I can put one of my patients on one of those. We can follow it to a T. And if we're not connecting to our place of agency of, oh, I am doing this because my health matters, my body matters, it, as opposed to, I can't have gluten, I can't have dairy, right? And then I'm stressed out because, what if I screw up? It's a whole different state. And yeah, so I feel like what I'm doing a lot right now is, if there's anything, I can offer my patients or to people who are on similar, trajectories of really, I mean, prolonged suffering, is, yeah, is there anything I convey, can convey to help shorten that period of, okay, how do you connect back to yourself? It's not nearly as important what you're doing than how you're doing it. And there's some really it's not as hard as we make it out to be. But it's uncomfortable and sometimes scary, because it means we have to connect to ourselves in our fullness. And oftentimes stuff that we have suppressed for a long time comes up, right? So ultimately it's like, what do you want? Right? Because functional medicine, integrative medicine can be incredibly powerful, beautiful, complicated, and expensive coping mechanisms, right? So and again, this is not a judgment, right? This is just like, okay, if I want just to live my life as it is right now, there are a lot of different things I can do, right, to maintain it and to not feel as bad as I did before. But really, deep healing is asking us for change. Healing is change. I mean, it's just the nature of it. I mean, change is the law of the universe. That's what is so funny to me. It's like, oh my God, but I'm so afraid of change. And I was so afraid of change. It's like, I have news for myself. What it
Fundamental
means
law
to
of the
be
universe.
alive. It's just a law. It's a fundamental law. And and I will say, this is one of my turning points for my healing journey, was recognizing, even though things have been going on for, close to a decade, the same symptoms, like every day, was like, change is a law of the universe. Like, the fact that this is permanent or seemingly permanent is an illusion, right? There's an opportunity in every moment for change. So how do we harness that? How do I open myself up? What does that even mean? And so, and I think that that's where the personalized medicine, the individualized medicine is, patients. And that's why I don't like the, the hat of the doctors, because people are still looking to doctors to give them something. And again, I can give them something to like definitely jumpstart things. Just like I am so grateful to my acupuncturist for helping me get to the next level where I could have more sense of agency. And then from that point on, it was a partnership, and he was like, you're leading this. And I was like, wait, what? You're the expert. It's your journey. I'm the navigator, you're the captain. It's like, oh God, it's scary. It's scary to be in that seat um, when we have no idea who we are. So, so yeah, so, and then the second really big moment of reckoning for me was, oh, okay. So if healing is change, what needs to change? And with the functional medicine, with the root cause medicine paradigm, it's understanding that all the different factors, right, going into the roots, which I named earlier, that was the culmination of what is manifesting now, right, as debilitation. And so even if that feels really overwhelming, because there's so many different factors, but even if I choose one or two to reverse or to change, then it will affect, right, the outcome, the expression of the tree. So not all of it has to be done at once. And in fact, it can be really overwhelming to do that. It can be stressful. The body might not respond as well, right? Because it's too sudden. And again, that's also where it's extremely variable. I have some patients who just blossom like almost, like in a month or something. And then others where they're on a journey, a little bit more like me, a little bit more like turtles. And then the other ones are more like the hares, so the turtles. And, but it's slow, but it is gradual. And by golly, it is steady, you know? So it's really just understanding how our constitutions are and what's going to work for us. And and you and I have spoken about this a lot, but tuning into intuition. And then it's like, what is that? But again, I just say, you know what, it really begins with quieting yourself, tuning into yourself, allowing your mind to fully seep down into your body and inhabiting even all the way down to the little pinky toe. Like, what does that feel like? And what messages are you getting? What signals are you getting? And then over time, you learn to interpret that, oh, that's a no. Oh, that's a yes, and then, oh, that's just, I don't know, I'm confused, So it's, but a lot of that takes time. A lot of that takes time.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to say that there's skill development here, right? Like intuition is something that any one of us can cultivate, essentially, that you can learn how to deepen your capacity to experience those feelings, those intuitive hits, those senses of like, oh yeah, this way, not that way, and there actually is a capacity to build skill in these areas. And I think that's important to mention. It's not like, oh, I'm either intuitive or I'm not. It's that, oh, I would like to become more intuitive, so I'm going to spend more time listening deeply inside of myself, in my system, in my body, and noticing, what do I feel? What do I sense? What do I, what are the connections that I'm experiencing? Starting to identify, maybe write them down, naming, labeling. And that those kinds of practices can help us to have a stronger relationship with our intuitive self. And so there's this whole piece in the theme of our conversation, Cynthia, around agency, around healing, being centered around the essence or the roots, that soil level kind of essential quality in nature. And then here, this other element of like intuition also being important, which is deep listening in one way of describing it. Intuitive capacities require a kind of inner knowing and inner listening. And what's ironic is so much of how we've currently designed our system of Western medicine is not to provide agency to the patient, right? Not to have things be patient-led and intuitive and customized and personalized. And a lot of the things that we've been discussing in our dialogue today, we've actually de-emphasized in the way that we have structured and designed our system of Western medicine. And I think we're in many ways at a turning point where many of us, yourself, myself included, are saying, look, we love Western medicine in many ways, and there are all of these other things that we're leaving out of the equation, which are so valuable. And to me, one of the most valuable pieces we're leaving out is that within each human being, there is a body of knowledge that knows how to heal. And we're forgetting and denying that within every single person that we work with, they have an inner knowing instilled so deeply inside of them that if we listen, can help to show us the way, to support them on their healing journey. And that denying that knowledge is really like, cutting us off. It's like taking a plant and, cutting off a part of the root and saying, oh, don't need to know that. It's like, yes, actually, you do need to know that. That's critically important. And so I wonder when you evaluate this incredible healing journey that you've been on, both personally and then how you've learned to relate to your patients using functional medicine, using these ideas of getting to the essence, using these ideas of drawing on agency and intuition, kind of how you want to see sort of systems level change occur in our world, and what you would want people that are listening to this podcast to know that you feel would help to guide them personally on their healing journey.
That's a great question. I mean, because what I was reflecting on as you were sharing was so first off, I want to say absolutely, there there is a skill, right, to medicine. I mean, there's an intense learning curve and training to learn what doctors learn and know, and and the expert and then the patient model is really based on necessarily, right, it's framed, it's structured that way because we're usually prescribing drugs with really potent effects and potential side effects, to say nothing of how they interact with each other. Procedures which require really high development of skill. And so I, like, when I go see a doctor, I want a really skilled doctor, so that's where you know what, I want to trust, right? When I went to see my thyroid specialist, I wanted to just, I was a doctor, but I didn't, he had 40 years of experience on top of me. I wanted not just to have his expertise, but also his expertise as seen through all the other patients he had seen and treated, right? So it's not just him looking at me, it's him looking at this entire, the whole body of, work that he had really cultivated, which I thought was really beautiful and powerful. So I don't want to discount that. That's really important. And yet there's this whole other piece, like you're saying, that's missing. And I will just say, having, a lot of the speaking engagements that I do now is with doctors in mainstream medicine. And there is a knowing that something needs to change, but like, how do we even begin to change? It's almost like where we are right now from where it needs to go is so great that there's a paralysis, and it's like, no, don't look at that. Like, just what's the next step, And, but there's an epidemic of burnout, which had long been there before the pandemic. And then now it's really at a critical place, right? So really what I have mostly towards, my fellow MDs is tremendous respect and also compassion. It's like, okay, there's tremendous burnout, and burnout, by definition is not just exhaustion, but it's depersonalization and then a sense of failure, right? So those are pretty big criteria, and it's now a bona fide, diagnosable, billable code. So recognizing that a lot of our healthcare professionals are starting from there. So one of the things I would say to a lot of my patients or even not even my patients, but just people that I would hear these remarkable healing experiences from, I would say, make sure you, tell your doctor, like, oh my God, your tumor shrunk after a qigong practice, like go share that with your doctor, because like, the more we communicate, the more, everyone's framework is broadened. Um, what I hear a lot of is like either it gets written off as kind of a fluke, or they're like, great, you know what, but there's no sense of wonder, no curiosity, like what did you do, and I remember actually one of my daughters had this perioral dermatitis when she was young, and it's like this notoriously difficult kind of eczema like rash. It doesn't respond. I mean, I didn't want to do steroid cream anyways, but when it was really bad, I would try anything, right? But it doesn't respond to steroid creams, right? And then I remember when we did this whole, just put the whole family on this, this gut healing diet. I didn't really know what I was doing. It was kind of an experiment. But again, the things and this is where I also think it's important that the difference between the expert versus self-empowered sort of agency is that a lot of the things that we do with lifestyle and diet is low risk. Like we don't actually need massive randomized controlled trials, and they don't work anyways because it's really personalized, right? The diet that worked for me 5 years ago is not actually what I need right now. And I don't even think of it in terms of a diet anymore. I'm just like, what does my body want? What does my body need? How do I stay in balance? And so it's much less prescriptive, but even so, when we start off, the prescriptive diets, could be helpful. Um, and so I was doing a prescriptive diet for our whole family. And then her dermatitis went away. And not only that, but she was having a lot of trouble with her cavities. And like suddenly, over the next 6 months, whatever, her enamel shifted, and she wasn't getting cavities. And so when we went for the next pediatrician checkup, I was, just reporting. I was like, it's not an issue anymore. Oh, and her asthma's gone. Oh, and her cavities. And I was really excited about it, but I was also feeling, proud as a mother doctor. And then, you know what? She was like, that sounds just like one of my kids. Oh my God, it sounds just like one of my kids. But what did you do? Oh my God, I'm not going to do it, you know? And so it was really fascinating to me, like to just see and to hear people's different responses. And again, no judgment, but I'm like, okay, forget about your daughter. I mean, your daughter, that's your family's choice. But like, you've got all these other patients who are seeing you, right? These kids and these parents, and you're not asking any questions. There's no curiosity. So part of it, I think, also is coming out of this place of burnout, right? If you're burned out, or you're even kind of like semi burned out, we're really not in a place of curiosity. I mean, who cares, right? We're just trying to survive. We're just trying to get through and just make do with whatever tools that we have. So really addressing, I feel like the way to I think it's the way transformation happens. It's always inside out. We can change the structures, but that takes, first of all, tremendous effort, and a willingness to dismantle actually what's there, right, and change, which is, I don't know. I think I don't really see that happening. There's too much money at stake. There's too much infrastructure in place. But how do we heal the healers? How do we help doctors connect to themselves, right? How do we? I mean, it is astonishing, right, that our education really is about uh, detachment from our body. Like, you go through boot camp if you are pregnant, if you're not feeling well, just, mind over matter, just push through it, detach, get through the training. And so, I mean, that's our training. And so when we become who it is that, you know, we become what we experience and the information that we're fed, unless we're fully awake and, have that sense of agency going in, like, no, that's not who I am. I was certainly not like that. So, for me personally, going through, my health journey was like, I don't even know what healing is. I don't even know what that means. I know how to treat diseases in a particular way. But if they're not diagnosable, but they don't feel well, I don't know what to do with that. And to say nothing of health and vitality as its own, you know, as its own essence to uphold and to preserve and to honor and to nourish. So if I look at the system, you know, just in terms of trying to get from this to that, it feels really, yeah, it just feels like a big mountain to climb. But when I see that, oh, more and more, like I'm being invited into mainstream circles of medical care, you know, talking to 600 doctors across specialties. And you know what? Some of this is kind of woo woo. I know that because I've been there. And yet there's a particular message, and it's actually quite simple. And so the more that I do these talks, I realize I just need to do it experientially. Like a didactic lecture is not going to work for them because that's how we connect to almost everything. So in order to really understand what healing is and transformation is, it's got to be experiential. So yeah, so that's, you know, that it's, and that's where I feel like, you know, we started off the conversation with like, oh, my MD sort of being you know, a mental prison, but it is now like a tool. It's like people see the medical degree in whatever capacity, whatever that, you know, so sometimes it's negative, sometimes it's really positive. But for those who do come, they're often, it's like their first step into something that's broader, you know, but because they can relate, oh, I've seen doctors before. Okay, she speaks a certain language that I know, and I'm going to see her as opposed to someone who's doing energy healing, you know. But surprise, surprise, I might actually introduce them to energy healing. But it's a door, you know, it's just a threshold. And so somehow with the doctors, because I've gone through a journey myself and I'm speaking from that place, it's not seen as threatening. Like I'm not there to judge them, you know, I'm just kind of there to explain and to show what it is that I went through and learned. And in the meantime, often kind of in a stealth mode, you know, guiding them through experientially how to connect with themselves. So when I look at it that way, I feel like the transformation, the potential for transformation is very quick, right? If doctors are connecting with themselves and they're seeing, oh, wait a minute, oh my God, you know, I need to take a time out for myself. I need to go nourish myself. And then what do I eat? You know, how do I even make time for myself? You got to get past that guilt or whatever it is, you know, all these stories that we tell ourselves. And if they can bring that into the exam room exactly as it is currently structured, it's a completely different encounter with that patient. So you know, that's my hope. Do I know it's possible? I do, you know, because I've gone through that. And I've also been in primary care, you know, knowing, so I know how it is to go in there as a transformed doctor, but it looks exactly the same on the outside, but the encounter is really different. And so yeah, so I think it can be quite quick. And I will say, I feel like there's more and more awareness and awakening, and I also know more doctors who are leaving the systems, right? Because they're not working. So either there's going to be a critical mass where there's enough doctors who are leaving because they're just burned out and unsatisfied, and so the system cannot sustain. I think that's going to take a really long time. Or you know, the other critical mass is that there's enough transformation that's happening to doctors who are currently in the system to where it just sort of changes from the inside out.
Yeah. And I think, as you've indicated in what you've shared, you know, the fact that physicians have twice the risk for suicide of the rest of the general population, that during COVID, 1 in 5 nurses have left the profession, that we now have shortages, and we're seeing these extraordinarily high levels of burnout, all the things that you've been touching on. There kind of has to be change.
Mhm.
I think we're at a moment where there has to be, because also with the number of people that have contracted COVID, and that we know there will be some long-term consequences to that, we're going to be in this for quite a time. We're going to have more stress on our healthcare system for quite some time. So I think we're actually ripe to create some remodeling, because I don't think the system as it stands can endure. So my sense is that there will be change, because there must be change. We're at a moment that's going to necessitate it on many levels. Well, as we bring our conversation to a close, there's 2 things I wanted to say. One is, you mentioned earlier on this idea of nervous system regulation, and how, if your nervous system isn't well regulated, then you don't do anything the same. You don't digest food the same. The nutrients aren't absorbed in the same way. So there's this base of optimal functioning within our nervous system. That's another area we have tremendous power and control over. And, we'll do other podcast episodes that are just entirely dedicated to that. But I just want to put out to our listeners who maybe aren't familiar with Dr. Stephen Porges's work around polyvagal theory, and then Deb Dana, who works closely with him on how you can train yourself to sort of optimize your nervous system functioning. Those are really important bodies of work to be aware of, because it will affect things like nutrient absorption and everything else. So critical knowledge to know about, and we'll do more discussion around that. But I'd like to end our dialogue today, Cynthia, with just a simple question of, given everything you've shared, given everything you've gone through as a person at this point in time, how would you describe or define today what healing is?
I would say, well, I would reiterate what I said earlier, that healing is change. Um, and I think even below that is healing is an awareness of change. Like we're kind of observing the change within ourselves and the capacity for change, but also the capacity for change around us. And one of the things that just keeps showing up for me, at least in this past year, is the role of the collective in healing. That when we heal, we don't just heal individually, we're actually healing our families, we're healing our environments, we're healing our communities, and there's a real ripple effect. And I don't even mean that symbolically. I mean, there's something really energetic that shifts. And I've observed that so much. It actually is just, it's funny to me how simple it is, is always. And I will also, another single word of a definition for healing is coherence, because we're talking about energy. So again, it's just this wave, and so one of my favorite and very accessible resources on nervous system regulation, but on coherence, is heartmath.org, right?
Yes.
And so you can get biofeedback apps, and you can watch your own breathing and heart rate and this and that. And, and I'm not tech savvy, so but I have patients who use that, and it's super simple, and it's literally, and it's on your device. And so you don't have to put your devices away and go into nature somewhere, to get coherence. You can actually use it as a tool. So, but that one of the things about coherence is, and they've shown this also, right, through science, and all of that's there on their website, is that when our minds are in coherence, when we're in this place of calm and flow and compassion, that our heart waves sync up as well, right? So they become and then it's called heart rate variability. We become more resilient. It translates into physical and emotional, mental resilience, translating then to improved health. But then that if I'm mentally coherent and then my heart waves are coherent as well, that I can bring someone else in my field into coherence too. They're not even trying to do the method or the practice or the breathing or whatever it is. They're just in the field, and we can bring them into coherence. But the opposite is the same too, right? If I'm in a really frustrated, chaotic pattern, that person does too. And so, I have two teenage girls at home, and so like there's a lot of chaotic energy and stuff. And so it's so interesting for me to watch, like, instead of sort of bringing resistance to it, which is kind of a reflexive, thing. It's like, oh, just okay, there's a lot going on there. I'm just going to stay coherent and just watching what I'm not even engaging with them, verbally, and something shifts. And so what I'm learning now, and again, some of this is through the science and heart math, was imagine if you've got a whole collective field, you've got 10 people in coherence, how strong that is, what kind of coherence you can bring around you. And so for me personally, it's been my Qigong practice too, which is a mind, body, spirit, embodied consciousness practice, based in ancient China, and now is really, really kind of become much more popular through integrative medicine. But, similar to Tai Chi, but it's the foundation of Tai Chi. It's the foundation of martial arts. And it is a way that I can bring myself into coherence because of this global field. And again, it can, on one level, can sound kind of, woo woo or even abstract, but when I see the science, and then I get really pragmatic, and I just say, I'll just ask people, like, okay, our bodies are 60 to 7% water. They're like, yeah. And I'm like, why do we experience ourselves as solid? And they're like, oh, and I'm like, and all the matter of our bodies is made up of atoms. Yeah, and I forget how many. It's like 10 to, like, I forget, the 32 or something crazy, huge number of atoms for the average human being. And it's like, but atoms, are 99.99% empty. But we also know through science that emptiness, it's not a void. There's subtle energy. And why do we still experience ourselves as solid? And they're like, oh, that's really interesting. But something about the energy, if our minds can connect to that subtle energy, which is actually who we are, that's what it means to be a body, is that things are much more in flow, right? So the air, the subtle energies, and even the water, things move much more quickly than if we're trying to change the form of something that's very fixed as the flesh. So there's something in the collective energy and this coherence, which is so paramount to healing and to resilience. And it simply requires a mind awareness of that. That's just what's kind of, bizarre. So what I find exciting about these times, as intense as they are, is that the science is finally catching up to what healers and wisdom teachers have been able to experience directly through their bodies and through intuition, as you spoke of, for millennia, right? But hasn't been able to be sort of translatable to the lay public and to people like me who are very didactic in learning. And so it's a very exciting time for science, for medicine, for being a human being, that we can share this kind of information and that we can experience really exponential healing in ways that were only accessible to, I think, small groups of people before. And the $1 billion question is, can we use the tools that we have for that capacity?
Yeah.
which is why I'm so appreciative of your work. And, and I just want to say, at the end of this conversation is just that you've been a real teacher for me on how do we integrate? And see, that's the thing, is like integrative medicine to me is not even where it is. All those pieces are really separate, and they're kind of like, I would see them as different spokes on a wheel. But integral and integrated, right, where all of those kind of come into the center. And again, maybe that's another word for essence, the essential level, the simplicity level. But I feel like what you do and your community does is you integrate that into, right, the systems that exist, and sort of it ripples out from there. And so no, so that's been a very practical, a very a very practical way, a very visible way for me to see, how do you apply that? How do you apply something that's kind of difficult to explain, right? And energetic and abstract and not scientific in the way that medicine defines science. But how do you bring that into the clinical setting? And so I just want to thank you for that, and your team.
Oh, well, that's so sweet, Cynthia. And I don't think I've even shared with you yet, but I'm actually writing a book about this therapeutic approach, about integrative touch therapy. And, because the whole framework and model for that therapeutic approach is team-based. The whole thing is done in community. It's community healing. So it's not led by one individual. It's a collective experience of healing that a group or a team of people helps to facilitate and support. And so I think, it's wonderful that we are at a moment where people can start to absorb these new models and possibilities for different ways that we can heal in community, like you were describing in
Absolutely. And and to that point about medicine and the medical culture and structure is the missing of the collective. And in our training, we were always collective. We had a team. We were always part of a team. And then suddenly, as soon as you're done with residency, like, we're on our own. I mean, we curbside people, and just do informal consults and things. But the team also is a huge cushion against burnout, right? And it doesn't have to be a lot of people either. It's literally just one other person together, and something about it just, the load exponentially decreases. So that is one of the areas which I feel like you and your team are really helping to model that, and to see, it's doable. And you know what? It's going to change the fee structures and all that. I mean, who cares if everyone's burned out? Who cares? You know what I mean?
right.
And so it's just going back to the simple questions of what really matters, and not being so attached to what it is that we thought our goals used to be.
Yeah. I have such a clear example of what you just shared in terms of the support system and structure of teamwork. One of the children that we've worked with for 7 or 8 years now passed away this week. He died. And our whole team, there was a whole group that had worked with him of about maybe 6 or 7 of us. And everybody supported one another through his death. Not only did we support him and his family, but we all supported each other because we were all so deeply touched by his life. And I just watched how it operated. It was organic, but because, we've designed things in this team-based way, you just saw each person helping each other. And it was magnificent. And everyone left this, heart-wrenching experience with a sense of being supported and cared for and loved through it. And I saw the mom felt that, like, we were with her in her hardest moments. We were right there. And she wanted us there because she knew, like, you genuinely love me you want to help me right now. And she could feel it, and she could feel like the depth of that, because there was a whole team of people that were there. And it just reminded me of like, yeah, this is what we want to design in medicine. We want to consciously design these networks of support so that our healthcare providers aren't so burnt out, so that they do feel like, oh, I can do this really hard work because there's other people that have my back and we're together, and there's a collective, and there's a strength and an endurance in that. And, we can actually navigate these really hard things more skillfully with those layers of support. So I'm a big advocate for creating a sense of community and healing. I think it's very important to do.
Beautiful. I couldn't agree more. And I think that, it would really also, just listening to you speak, I mean, so much of it was heart-centered, was restoring the heart to medicine, and and it's scary, because we have pathologized grief. We have pathologized a lot of things which are part of life. And so, but if there's the collective, then that sense of free fall, right, is not there. That sense of despair amidst grief, right, is exactly what you're saying, is that there's, hey, we're all in this together. We're all kind of, one organism. And so it has to change, just like you were saying. It has to. Otherwise, it's just going to be heartbreak after heartbreak after heartbreak, as the heart demands to be opened.
And what you just said there, Cynthia, I feel like when you hold the collective knowledge around death, a true understanding that we're all going to die. And so, with that realization is the recognition of, okay, so then let's make this death a good death, for this patient, for this individual, for this loved one. Let's make this death a good death, because every death ultimately at its core, at its essence, is an inevitability, right? And so from that broadened perspective of, yep, death is just simply an inevitability of a lived human experience. So then what is essential, right? To your sort of conceptualization of, well, then what is essential? What is essential then is, let's make this one a good one, And so I could actually feel that. I could feel our team, around this child who died. I could feel them just wanting to make this one a good one, instead of resisting it, instead of fighting it, instead of, all the energy that can go against. There was instead an energy of acceptance and, a remembering of this too is a part of life, and a willingness to just embrace and hold together with presence together. And it's a beautiful capacity we have when we really allow ourselves to, hold that together.
Beautiful.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you so much for this deep and profound conversation. I feel like I could talk to you eternally. So it's only the beginning. But for today, it is our ending. And I want to thank you just so much for being a guest on the Conversations on Healing podcast, and for being someone who's in my life. So thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you. Thank you, Shay.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Conversations on Healing podcast. If you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your preferred podcast platform and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. It helps so you won't miss an episode. See you next time.